So welcome everybody to Money Moves. Wendy, it's great to see you again.
You too. How you
And
doing?
I'm doing great, man. Just getting over this COVID thing. It's
It's a struggle.
it is. The struggle's real. I'm like, okay, it's the flu or whatever, and it was a flu. Don't get me wrong, but the recovery time takes a little longer. But I'm zinking up, and I've got my vitamins and multivitamins and multivitamins and some other stuff, so it's all good, and feel a lot better. But thanks to everybody who reached out to me and asked about that. But today we're going to be talking about an exciting topic that people can't wait to talk about, which is life insurance, right? And everybody's like, oh, no, not life insurance. Well, it plays a role, right? Just like in anything. And we're going to talk about, do you actually need it? Do you need life insurance? And if you do, how much and what kind and all that stuff. So we're going to talk about all that today. So reach out to your friends, family, and everybody else who might be curious about this and let them know, hey, we're getting ready to get started. And we'll get started in just a few seconds. I love that entry. I tell you what, we are making life insurance and financial edutainment as fun as possible for you and as dramatic as possible.
Dramatic.
There you go. I feel like I'm watching 300 or something. So I love that. We may need to go a little lighter later on in the year, but I don't know. Just saying. So talk to me, Winnie. What about life insurance? Do I need it? What's going on with that?
Yeah. Well, I've learned a lot about life insurance recently. Honestly, I've always had it. I've always been told by the financial guy that I need it. I've never really been told how much. I've been told how much I need, but not really why. Mm-hmm. Right. So I'm just like,
that's good.
All right, just tell me, and okay, we'll do it. And I did not understand until this year really the difference between term and permanent. Right? Mm-hmm. They're like, you're on this 20. I'm like, okay. Like, how many people? I don't know if I'm the only one. I think I'm not, but that we just do what the financial person says, and we just sign up, sign the dotted line if we can afford it. And if we can't afford it, our only logic is I need to pay less, right? We don't understand the value, the benefit, and what it's doing for us long term. So
yeah, and there's a lot of moving parts on that. I know when I first started out in life too, it's okay, yeah, you need life insurance. Well, how much? I don't know. I thought 250 grand. That sounds like a lot of money to me at the time, right? So that's what you do. So, there's actually a formula in there. We're going to talk about that today on how much you need, what types you need. And, you hear about this. Well, it's all about buy term, invest the rest. And, you're going to self-insure. That's kind of a misnomer, right? It's very few people actually do that. Or how do you self-insure? What does that actually mean? And so we're going to talk about all that different stuff today. So the first thing to kind of jump into is, where do I get life insurance? And most of us get it from work, right? You get that job and they've got benefits and you're like, oh, okay, cool. I get all this different type of stuff, and one of it is typically life insurance. And it's usually depending on the company, right? If it's a smaller company, they're going to give you maybe a flat amount of 25, 50,000, maybe $100,000. Or if it's a larger company, they'll do, X times your salary. So they'll give you 1X, and then you can opt in to get up to, 3, 4, 5 times your annual salary. And that's what's called group term, because you're in a group, right? It's like your own little tribe, your employer, or maybe your credit union. Sometimes they do stuff like that too, different things and aspects. But that's really like renting insurance. It's like renting a house. You don't really own that. When you leave that organization or leave whatever, you lose that, right? So it goes away. I don't know if have you ever had any stuff through work? I'm assuming.
My corporate years, I think most of the places I worked didn't allow you to not opt in, right? Like it was just a part of it that you got. Yeah. But I didn't realize when I got it, you leave and you're done. Because honestly, I was I get bored easy. So I didn't stay at any corporate job for longer than 3 years. So it really did me no good, except I guess the years I worked there. But Yeah, I love the way that you say that. It's like renting, right?
Hmm.
Because I never really understood that before. So it's so important that you have your own, right,
Yeah.
outside of your business. Absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of people, and just to kind of throw in there, there's a big difference between life insurance and what's called AD&D, accidental death and dismemberment. A lot of people I've seen will have clients actually coming in, they'll have an AD&D policy thinking it's life insurance, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to be very conscious. I'm amazed at how many clients, and you've seen it as we've been talking to people, how many clients don't actually, I've got life insurance, but I don't really know what it is or how long it is or whatever the
Almost
case. And
everyone we talk to doesn't know what they have.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's a big part of your financial planning part, right? Of your wealth building, because that's the protection piece. You're building this empire, and that life insurance can be used as kind of a shield around your empire, to kind of use that analogy. But it's one of those things that you got to know what you do. So, that first type is that group term, right? Which is through your employer and things like that. And don't get me wrong, it's a great way to supplement or augment your protection strategy. But again, you're renting it. It's temporary, right? And if you want to go and start a business or whatever, all of a sudden it's gone now.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you do? That's why I always tell people, grab it. It's like the cherry on top, right? Or the gravy on whatever. It's the bonus.
It's the bonus. Exactly.
Yeah, it's the bonus. So then you get to what do I need as far as insurance? Where do I get it and things like that. So let's kind of look at there's two gurus out there we talk about. One's a guy here in Tennessee, and then there's another lady that is short blonde hair. Dave and Susie, what they talk about is always buy term, right? And, I look at your protection strategy as, again, part of your empire building, but think of it like a house, right? Every house, has a strong foundation, and then you've got the big house on top of it, depending on what size family you have or whatever the case may be. And I love that analogy for the simple fact that I may have a 3-bedroom ranch on top of that foundation, or I may have a big 2-story, 5-bedroom because I've got a big family.
Right.
The bigger the family, the bigger the need, the bigger the house. Same thing applies with your life insurance strategy. Right. Okay. So you've got that big house, but you look at that foundation versus the actual house on top. That foundation, and I'm going to ruffle some feathers here, you need a permanent insurance strategy for that piece of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first time I ever heard about permanent insurance, I have the book right in front of me, was this book. Mm-hmm. I had never, ever heard of it. I only knew what term policies were. And then he preaches it in this book, right? Which is contrary to what living in Middle Tennessee you hear from our guru.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things that, life insurance has a job to do. Mm-hmm. Okay. Its job is to step in when you step out. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what do I mean by that? Well, when you step out of life because of whatever happens, right? Health, accident, whatever the case may be, and you never know, right? It steps in to take care of your responsibilities, take care of your families, and replace that income and things like that. And so, you look at when you're young and starting out, you've got very little assets, very little expenses. But then what happens? You start acquiring. We go into acquisition mode. You acquire a house, you acquire more stuff, you acquire assets. Children, right? The biggest asset of all. And all of a sudden, your protection, goes from this, and then all of the need goes up through here. And then as you have the kids move on and start doing their own thing, you pay off the bills and things like that, your need starts to go down again.
Right.
So that foundation in the house kind of mindset is, I want a foundation of permanent insurance that literally will be there through age 100, 120, or whatever the case may be. And you use that for final expense, for passing on assets. You can use that to cover taxes. I see a lot of people that unfortunately have huge swaths of land here in Tennessee, right? The family farm and things like that. And what happens, because they don't have the right protection strategy, when mom and dad pass on, the kids have to sell off large portions of land to do what? Pay probate, pay taxes, and all that stuff. And that's just bad planning. And that's why, again, you want a holistic approach, but you want to have that underlying permanent strategy. And then those formative years, the temporary term, that's where that comes in. It's cheap coverage. But again, so I want everybody to understand that mindset. If you've got questions on that, post in the comments. We'll be more than happy to answer. If you want to sit down and go do a deep dive one-on-one, we'd be more than happy to help you with that out too. So, again, I do need term, but you also need that underlying foundation,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
So then the next question is how much? Winnie, how much for you? How much for you versus how much for me?
Yeah. A lot more than I thought.
Well, why is that though? What
Right.
what goes into that formula?
So we use a formula called DIME, right?
Hmm.
So you're going to have to help me out with all the acronyms or what it stands for. I'm still learning. I'm in the learning process, but I know it's about, your debt. So D is for debt, right?
Hmm.
So
Yep.
covering your
That's all
debt, so
your,
you're not
credit
leaving your
cards.
family
Yeah.
with that, right? Um,
Yep.
Replacing your income,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
Help me out with M.
Mortgage. Leave that
Mortgage,
asset
all
free
right.
and clear.
Assets. And then the E, education for your kids in the future and the expenses that come with when you pass, right?
Yeah,
Did
final
I cover it?
expenses and stuff like that. Yeah, that's perfect, right? It's like a
Okay.
nickel and a dime.
Yeah.
So you've got your debts, and like when you said, you want to make sure you're leaving everybody else debt free.
Right.
The income is the one that's really overlooked, and you look at how much income. Well, you think about how much income you, the listener, makes every year, okay, and or your spouse, right? And you got to ask yourself, if something happened to that, could I afford everything that we're building by myself with my own income? Because you're going to lose that income. And so we look to have 5 to 10 years of replacement income, not 20 years, but 5 to 10 years. If you've got young kids, young families starting out, you're kind of on that upward curve, that upward trend of the need we were talking about just now. You're going to look to 10 years. If the kids are out of the house, you're on the downward side, then you're going to look to 5 years of protection, right? That way the spouse can kind of move through things and get into the next phase of their life without you. But you look at that and it's like, okay, well, wait a minute, that adds up to quite a bit of money, and it does. But that's what you're bringing to the table, And I shake my head when especially like I said, when I first started life, I got out of 250,000 policy. I thought, man, that's plenty, because that sounded like a lot of money. Well, that wouldn't even have covered the mortgage, right? And much less my income, and we had young kids and things like that. And you look at that, and here's what typically happens, when families are unprotected, especially if you've got kids. So dad passes away, right? The traditional breadwinner passes away, has a couple $100,000. Well, that's not going to cover everything as far as all the expenses in the future, college, paying off the house. So what typically happens then, can't afford the house anymore. So we need to sell the house, and then the kids are then yanked from their support system at school, all their friends and stuff like that. And that's a transition that's hard enough anyway. So now their entire world's up, the apple cart's upset.
And I've
right?
seen that happen.
Mm-hmm.
It was years ago, but I had a friend who lost her husband and he did not have insurance, and he was the breadwinner. I mean, not only they deal with the loss of their dad, these kids, but it literally wrecked their whole lives.
Yeah.
And it's just, we got to, nobody wants to think about dying, right?
But well, don't think of it as dying. Think of it as, protecting your empire. Right. That's the way I love to think about it, about the mindset, because that's exactly what it does. So, you add all these numbers up. So, if I've got, 25,000 in debt, I've got an income of, say 75,000 per year. So there's, 750 plus the other, 25,000. So there's 775, a couple kids. Right. And then we've got, so a couple of kids, there's 200,000. I use $100,000 for seed money or education money. That's going to cover most colleges at a state school, right? Or at least pay a large portion of it. And then the final expense, I estimate about 15,000 for final expense. And then, maybe a little extra for any tax needs or whatever, but that's going to pretty much cover what you need. So if you need $1 million in coverage, right? Then, that underlying, you should look to have at least 250 of it in some kind of permanent strategy at a minimum. And then the rest of it can be term that expires in, I'm not a big fan of 30-year term. I like 20-year term. And the reason is that gets you through the kids, right? If you've got young kids, that gets them up and out of the house or through college or whatever the case. Obviously, you want to do an analysis individually. You don't just want to say, oh, all I need is a 20-year term. You may need a 30-year, or you may need a 10-year. It just really depends on, what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Now, one thing that you may have this in your notes to address, but that with that permanent insurance is, so I think about like my grandmother who my grandfather had term, but expired. They didn't have permanent. So he died after the term was done. At that point, they didn't get it because it was so expensive. They
Mhm.
couldn't afford it in retirement. And then when he passed, right, the family had to chip in and pay for things. And she lives, off Social Security and the help of
Yeah.
family because there was nothing for her. And she's now 94, right?
Yeah.
95. And she's probably going to live to 100 because she's
Yep.
amazing. But it's like now there's all these years that she could have, if he had permanent insurance, she could have had some things taken care of her and she didn't. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where I feel like I didn't realize, with that term expiring. And then most people, I think you see this, right? They can't afford it
Mhm.
again.
Well, and that's exactly what happens. And the argument is, well, they should have been saving and sell, and built an empire and had $1 million cash sitting there. Well, let's be realistic, folks.
How many of y'all are doing that?
Yeah, I mean, most of us are, getting by out there in middle America, check to check. Maybe we're stacking a little money back because we don't really understand how the whole money thing works. So it's not happening. Let's just be honest about it. Most people aren't doing that. Yeah, the people that are held up by the gurus, they're like the 1-5%er, right? It's like, oh, okay, that person did it, but the other 20 people didn't.
Right.
And that's where it comes into. You don't want to have all permanent. You don't want to have all term. You want to have that hybrid. Think of it like the foundation and the house on top. But yeah, I mean, I get fired up about this because that's exactly what happens. You have these people talking about don't buy anything but term, don't buy anything but term. And then what happens is instead of investing the rest, they go out and buy a truck, or they got to pay for their house, or they got to pay for their kid's school, or whatever. They got to pay for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, it pisses me off when all of a sudden now these people get to the. I'm sorry, I get fired up about it, but they get to the other side of life, right? And they're 55, 60 years old thinking, okay, well, my 30-year term that I got when I was 30 at, ABC Insurance Company expired. I was paying $40 a month for it. Let's go out and get another one for $40 a month. It doesn't work like that now. It does not work like that because you're much, much older. You've got your mortality tables. You're more than likely going to pass away. So even if you can get a 10 or 20-year policy, you're going to pay through the nose for it if you can even qualify for it now, because what happens is you end up getting less and less healthy as life goes on, folks. That's what happens, right?
Starting age 30, we're all dying.
I mean, well, I'm going to say 45, but it's one of those things that 45 is the new 30, but it's one of those that you're healthy and you don't qualify for it anymore. And a lot of people think that, oh, I'll just keep paying my term. Well, if you look, and it's usually it's called the premium table. Every insurance policy has this. So pull out your existing term insurance and look back at the premium table, and you'll see your fixed payment for 10, 20, 30 years, whatever your term is. And then look what happens in year 31 or year 21 or whatever. All of a sudden, those premiums start jumping up through the roof. They'll let you keep the insurance, but you're going to pay dearly for it. And the whole point is they want to price you out of it. So they'll know you'll cancel the policy at that point and go somewhere else. That's how that industry works, right? And that's why it's so critical, guys, that you have that underlying permanent amount. And there's so much more you can do with it too. One of the big arguments we hear and we do a lot of term, we do a lot of permanent, we do a lot of financial planning. We do everything at my company, but we look at that aspect of what else can I get for that? What bang can I get for my buck if I'm going to spend this money on what the gurus say is so expensive when it's actually not as expensive as you think, right? Depending on what you do. And what I'm talking about there is the value versus the expense. And there's a huge difference there. Okay. And
price and cost are two very different things, right? And looking at value, I think in anything in life, right? We look at the price of something, but it all comes down to the value you're getting for the price, right? And Zig Ziglar has a cool little video out there on price versus what he calls cost, right? So the price is what you pay for something. The cost is what happens if you don't, right? Like if you don't invest in that and you're just looking at the price, what's the cost to you, right? So really it's building up that value. So I love your little demonstration that you do that really helped me wrap my head around it too. So,
well, and I always tell people how many times, I know I've done this, but how many times have you gone and tried to go on the cheap, right?
Yeah.
And you end up buying something and then you end up buying it again, which you should have bought in the first place. You end up paying twice for something that you should have only paid once for if you'd have done it right the first time. And it really looks at that value versus what the actual cost is, right? So, the analogy I use is let's pretend I got my hands closed and I've got something in each hand, right? and you have $100 bill, and you give me that $100 bill, and I say, okay, pick a hand. You pick what's in my left hand. I show you a Snicker bar. And don't get me wrong, I love Snicker bars, but if I just charge you $100 for a Snicker bar, how would you feel about that?
Ripped off.
You paid way too much for it, right? Right? You paid way too much for a Snicker bar.
Better be gold in that Snickers.
I know, right? Like the Willy Wonka golden ticket. So the next, we do it over, and you pick my right hand, and I hand you the keys to my car, right? And it's a nice Denali. It's tricked out and everything else. I mean, so you feel, how do you feel about that deal now?
I just
that I just gave you my car for.
I just ripped you off.
Yeah, exactly. So the mindset I'm trying to teach everybody here is, let's stop for a second. It's the same $100 that you spent in both scenarios.
Right.
Okay, for the Snicker bar. So the cost was the same. It's the value you get for that $100 that makes a world of difference. And that's some of the thing that, if you look at the permanent strategies, I know I'm not talking just whole life. A lot of people say, oh, well, whole life's the solution. I don't believe that either. But there are a lot of different things out there that you can do with permanent insurance beyond just getting insurance protection. Mm-hmm. Again, it's not, you don't use that permanent insurance for insurance. You use it for 20 different other things. The insurance part of it is the cherry on top. It's the bonus, right? Mm-hmm. And it can actually, pay for itself. And I've got this thing I walk through that 5 different ways that permanent insurance is free. Now I'm free. This is educational, right? Don't think that people are giving away insurance, but you look at the overall cost and the opportunity cost and things like that. That's really where it starts to like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this. And that's the education that I got. I woke up and said, whoa, wait a minute. And that's one of the things I showed you of, yeah, they're right. You want term, but you also want that underlying permanent strategy out there because you can use it for, getting market growth, right? You can use it for tax protection. You can use it for, protection from lawsuits and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do to help shield your nest egg, to shield your money and things like that beyond just protecting my income and, that whole dime formula we just talked about. So right. I talked a lot on that.
No, it's good though. And, I just want to say to those watching, like, if you don't have someone that's teaching you this and showing you your options, reach out to one of us and like, let's get on a call and show you, right? It's worth looking at. It's worth seeing the value before just listening to some blanket statement posted on the internet by somebody that you think knows everything.
Well, and that's the problem. I mean, there's so much noise out there and it's like people just blindly follow. And that's one of the things that I've always recognized, that everybody's got an opinion, right? Opinions are like, what, right? But it's one of those things that you've got to do the homework for yourself. And what may be right for you may not be right for the other person, the next person listening to this. Right. But you've got to educate yourself. And that's where, we built our company. And that's why we started the Black Swan Money Channel, was to educate, right? So people start asking the questions, well, what if, or should I look at something like that? Because you don't know until you actually start looking at questions, but you want to be the one
empowered to make our own decisions. Right.
There you go.
Not blindly trusting and assuming that there's a one size fits all answer, because there's not. And I've sat through, enough in the last month working with you of looking at different people's situations, and it's different for everybody. Right.
Yeah.
And I love that, we empower people, right? We give them and make sure that they understand exactly what's presented to them of what their options are. And what the pros and cons of each thing are, right? Yeah, and that's what I've loved the most about this and the education here, is that I feel empowered. I don't feel like I'm just going like I did in the past, like, okay, whatever you say, right?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, because that's how people get taken advantage of, and you hear a lot about, well, such and such, I can trust them because they're a fiduciary or whatever the case may be. I'm going to tell you right now, Bernie Madoff, if you don't know who he is, look him up. He was a fiduciary, right? Yeah. So that means absolutely nothing. I mean, you've got to understand the concepts behind it and work with somebody, interview somebody that you trust, you build a rapport with, that are in the same, mindset of you, of helping you get to where you want to. But at the end of the day, folks, as far as building assets, protecting your family, things like that, nobody's going to care about your assets more than you, right? So it would be a smart idea to start, reading some of these books, asking the questions. We've got the Black Swan Money Club that we're starting up. What a great place for you to hop in and start asking questions in there just to learn, so check that out at blackswanmoney.club. blackswanmoney.club. We'll put the link in the chat. But, you know, it's one of those things that's what you want to do. You want to learn. And there's some great books out there. There's one called The Laser Fund. I forget the author, but, you know, LASER, Laser Fund. And then the other one is The Financial Pocket Knife. And I think that's Jim Stoddard, or Stoddard's the last name, but it's either Jim or Tom. But it's called The Financial Pocket Knife, and it talks about different ways that you can use, you know, just life insurance or whatever else. And don't get me wrong, we do everything. We have all the different products, IRAs and stuff like that at my company. But again, today we're talking about the life insurance piece, and I get infuriated when I hear, you know, oh, go out and buy the cheapest term policy you can. And think about that the last time you went to a store and bought the cheapest X or whatever that you can. How long did it last? What did it actually do for you? And hopefully you've had that life lesson in the past. So, but again, how much do I need? Use the dime formula, right? Should I just do it through my employer? Not at all. That's like renting your protection, right? You want to have some that you own, that you take with you throughout your life. And then what type? I want to have some permanent, but yeah, the lion's share of it, you want to be term. Okay. And if you've got questions on any of that, let us know. But when do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I think it's great. Hopefully you guys got some value out of it. And again, more empowered to make the right decisions for you and your family.
Yep. And don't leave your family unprotected. Yeah. Okay. Because you never know when it's going to happen. And I've seen it happen where literally families are financially devastated when something happens, and you never know when. So take a look at it. It's a lot cheaper than you thought too, especially if you're younger. Pennies on the dollar to protect your family. So everybody, hopefully you got something out of this. Do us a favor. Share this video or share some of the other videos. Check out the videos. We've got like over 40 videos on different financial topics now. And it's a great way while you're driving to work or whatever, just listen and kind of pick up on some of this. We'd love to hear from you too. If you've got a topic or whatever, and I hear some kids in the background fired up for the day. But do us a favor and chime in. Let us know. We want to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe and like and share. So everybody have a great day. Wendy, thanks for being here.